every year, there's a whole list of how the U.S. economy is in trouble. It's going to be in trouble. And you know what it's done over all those years? Basically, it grows all the time. Does it grow every minute? Of course not. Is everything perfect? Of course not. Imagine what we'd do if everything was perfect. But it's in spite of, we still grow. We still grow. We still do. Why? Because we have a fairly entrepreneurial society. We have a fairly aggressive society in terms of welcoming immigrants. We may not welcome them, but compared to most places, we're pretty welcoming, say, compared to Japan or China or other economies. I wish we were more welcoming. We like entrepreneurs. I wish we liked them more, but we like entrepreneurs. We like success. That's why we grow.
Hello, left fielders. Welcome to the Passive Investing from Left Field podcast. Our community is focused on networking and education to help people invest passively and think differently. Let's go. I'm really excited today to have Dr. Peter Linneman with us. He holds both master's and doctorate degrees in economics from the University of Chicago. He is the principal of Linneman Associates, and for nearly 4 decades, he has provided strategic and financial advice to leading corporations. Through Linneman Associates, he provides M&A analysis, market studies, feasibility analysis, all of that to a bunch of leading U.S. and international companies. In addition, he serves as an advisor to and a board member of several public and private companies. Peter was a professor of real estate at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania from 1979 until his retirement in 2011. He's an accomplished author, having written books, articles, and of course, the Linneman Letter, which is a quarterly letter for commercial real estate investors, and so much more in Peter's past that he's done and currently doing. So I will leave it to him to explain it. But Peter, welcome to the Passive Investing from Left Field podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jim. And it just occurred to me as you were saying the introduction, you said for nearly 40 years. I really began the advisory part of my life in 1979, and it just dawned on me we're well over 40 years at this point. So I'm old.
That's right. Well, who's counting, right?
Right.
So the first question I usually ask is just to kind of get a sense of your journey. You know, we've talked about it, right? Over 40 years you've been in real estate, but how did you get there? And kind of just a little bit about your journey until you got here today.
So sure, everybody loves to talk about the wonder of themselves. I grew up in a place called Lima, Ohio, which was wasn't Rust Belt then. It was real industrial heartland of America. And my family was blue collar. The city was blue collar. I went to university. One other sibling of mine went to university, but 3 didn't. While at university, I met an amazing woman who's 101 now, who she served on 5 Fortune 500 boards in the 70s and 80s and was a professor of mine, and was Dr. Lucille Ford, and took economics with her. And she said, you ought to go to University of Chicago and study with Milton Friedman and Gary Becker. And I did. And I had the opportunity to study under these amazing minds at the University of Chicago as an economist. And then they said, oh, you ought to stay on our faculty. And I said, well, that sounds good. And because I'm a blue collar kid, what the hell do I know, you know? And then Wharton, you mentioned, in 1979 came and hired me away from Chicago. And as that occurred, I had calls from Michelin Tire and from the 3rd largest paper manufacturer in the country at that time, independent, saying, gee, we hear we should hire you as a consultant, because they needed a consultant. A real person was not available. They said, well, who do you suggest? I was a young guy that they knew about, but I wasn't doing any consulting. And to get them off the phone, they said my name, and I said yes, which was a great lesson, which is do good work. Somebody might notice and recommend you. And then when the opportunity comes, take the opportunity. And for the first 5 or 6 years of my career, I wasn't doing real estate. I was doing LBOs and antitrust and finance and structuring kind of stuff, economics. And then in 1985, the way I got into real estate was Russ Palmer, who was the best dean I've ever seen, was in his second year. And he said, Wharton's got the worst effort of anything possible in real estate. Tell me if I should close it or grow it. And he was right. It was scandalous, and I had nothing to do with it. And it was, and I said I studied it like a consulting project and said you ought to grow it because we're in the professionalization business. This is 1985, and we should be at the vanguard of professionalizing this industry. And he said, great, why don't you do it? I said, I don't know anything about it. And he said, you'll learn. And I knew, quote, new finance and I knew economics, but I didn't really know real estate. It was all tax gimmicks back then. Not all, but it was a lot of tax gimmicks. And, but I'm a good student. So instead of learning from Milton Friedman and Gary Becker and Nobel Prize winners, I was able to get Al Taubman and Mel Simon and Mort Zuckerman and Gene Cohn and Claude Ballard and an amazing array of people to teach me the industry. And so the next thing you knew, I was not only Wharton's program had grown and become amazing, and others copied it and improved it over the years, but I had kind of stumbled into an expertise. And I became chairman of Rockefeller Center in 1995. I still remember Pete Peterson was on the board. He was one of the co-founders of Blackstone and 3 other legends and me. And they were a generation older. And I still remember the moment. It was a very difficult situation. And they looked at me and said, well, what do you think we ought to do? And I thought to myself, why are they asking me? And then you have that moment of clarity. This is it, right? This is all there is. It's just good people trying to do the best they can with the limited knowledge they can and trying to gather. That started me down that path. And Sam Zell hired me away for 1.5 years while I was on sabbatical a couple of years later to help him wind down some stuff and grow some stuff. That was an amazing experience. And then, we have expanded into some investing, Linneman Letter, et cetera, et cetera. We have an online program to educate people on the industry. And it's been an amazing journey with amazing people. And it's like an overnight success that took, I don't know, what did we just say, 45 years or 44 years, if you will. No, but it's been a wonderful experience. And you wake up one day and people say, oh, you're an expert in something. And you're not.
Right.
Because you know what you don't know, which is endless, what you don't know. And in fact, the more people say I'm an expert, the more I realize I'm not. I don't know so much, right? So anyway, Jim, that's the quick version.
That's great. And that's a great way to keep a life of learning, right? To think that you're not the expert, that means you're going to go out and keep learning. And it seems like learning is a focus for you. And so I guess, my first real question is, as you were going through this, you listed off a lot of people who helped you along the way and taught you and were mentors to you. And that's fantastic. But how did you find these great mentors and teachers and get them to kind of help you, especially with learning the real estate part?
Well, the university part was easier because they were paid to teach me. Although, as you know, it's not so easy to get a great person to focus. But what I was good at is identifying people I could learn from. They could identify that I was serious and committed and would work hard. And then when you get to the real estate side, you have to ask. And so, like Al Taubman in 1985 really almost until his death 8 years ago, whenever. It was like the person in the industry. It was like synonymous with quality and so forth and judgment. Um, and I asked, would you be interested in helping us develop Wharton's program? Now, by the way, there were several people I asked and said, no, thank you. I'm involved with hospitals, or I'm involved in something else. It's people. Sam Zell, very dear friend for 33 years, just passed away a week or so ago. And people say, oh, how'd you meet? We ran into one another on the circuit, the conference circuit. And like 1991 or something. And he was the only other person, I'm being facetious, he was the only other person who I thought made sense. And he thought I was the only other person who made sense. And so you start talking. So instead of just rushing off stage, you took the time to say, wow, that was kind of interesting. And then you start exchanging. And I was just blessed that people were willing to share. And a lot of amazing people were willing to share. And I'm a pretty good student in the sense I know how to learn.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm the greatest student, but I know how to learn. And I think a lot of people, Jim, to your point, don't know how to learn. They aren't curious enough, right? Learning is a skill.
Yeah.
There's a real skill to learning. And one of the things I have found in my life is I'm very skilled. I've become very skilled at learning. But how did I get them? I asked. And then you build a relationship. And you didn't build a relationship in the first meeting. I'll tell you, if you've got time, I'll tell you a cute story with Al Taubman. How did I build a relationship? So I met Al. We asked him if he would help us with the real estate program in 1985. He came, he had lunch. We had nice chemistry. For 2 hours, we talked about what might be possible, how we could improve the industry. And he said, I'm going to be at ULI I think it was in Chicago in like 3 weeks. Are you going to be there? And I had just joined ULI. I had no idea what ULI even was. And so I said, yeah, but I am. So he said, well, why don't you have breakfast with me on the Saturday? So I go over and he's got this big breakfast set out for us in his suite. And we talked for what we thought was going to be a half an hour, but it became 2 hours. And he said, I don't have to give a speech. This was like at 8 a.m. I have to give a speech at 1 o'clock. And I said, well, I have to give a speech at 1 o'clock as well. He said, well, why don't we go out to Woodfield Mall, which was on a Saturday morning, a 30-minute drive out to one of his legendary shopping centers. So we're in the car and you're kind of talking and you're thising and you're thating. We walk the shopping center together. He's pointing out to me why you did this or why you did that or why you did. We go into A&W restaurant, which he owned at the time, and we get curly fries and hamburgers. And in the kitchen, we go back in the kitchen and get curly fries and hamburgers. And as we're heading back to the city, back to Chicago from the suburbs, he said, oh, we didn't try the hot dogs. And I said, no, I'm not a big hot dog fan, and so don't worry. And we'll get you hot dogs. And then that was a Saturday. And on the Monday morning, I get a call from my wife saying, we just got 20 pounds of hot dogs on dry ice from the A&W, and it's like, but that, that's how you build relationships. Absolutely. It wasn't intended. It just was. I could have gone just saying, all I'm going to do is say something about Wharton and and I could give you a story on everybody that way, of something. And I'm sure you can with every one of your friends and cronies in life.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And it just shows that, it's available if you take it, right? You had to make the choice to go meet with him, and then you had to make the choice to get in the car and go to the mall. I mean, you could have said no at any time, but you're curious and wanted to learn, and you did it. And I think that's good, a good lesson for others out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So I'd like to really get into it. So in your recent letter, the Linneman Letter, you started off, stating the strengths of the current economy. Industrial output's up, retail spending's up, unemployment's low, wages have outstripped inflation. So everyone's talking about how bad the economy is, and we're either in a recession or headed into a recession. But it seems like you have a different viewpoint. Can you talk about how you see the current state of things right now?
Sure. So let me take a 1/2 step back. I'm 72 years old. And as I reflect on my life, when I'm old enough to understand what people are saying, 17, 16, they've always said, list of all the horrible things. Unemployment or this or this or that. I mean, literally, and in your life, every year, there's a whole list of how the U.S. economy and is in trouble. It's going to be in trouble. And you know what it's done over all those years? Basically, it grows all the time. So why do I feel different? Because I know that. I'm an empirical kind of guy. And I've observed, let's say, since 17, what'd that be? It's like 50, whatever, you get the point. It grows. Does it grow every minute? Of course not. Is everything perfect? Of course not. Imagine what we'd do if everything was perfect. But it's in spite of. We still grow. We still grow. We still do. Why? Because we have a fairly entrepreneurial society. We have a fairly aggressive society in terms of welcoming immigrants. We may not welcome them, but compared to most places, we're pretty welcoming, say, compared to Japan or China or other economies. I wish we were more welcoming. We like entrepreneurs. I wish we liked them more, but we like entrepreneurs. We like success. That's why we grow. Now, let me step back into the current moment with that backdrop. But I think that backdrop's important because, trust me, 3 years from now, there's going to be a laundry list of, oh my, isn't it awful? And 5 years from now, there's going to be, oh my, isn't it awful? So let's step from that into the current time. So let me give you some good things. Real GDP is still about 2.5% of pre-pandemic trend. So what's that mean? It means we've recovered from the pandemic, but in 3 years, we grew 2 years. And we should have grown 3 years. And I think sometime over the course of history, we're going to get that back. And I don't know exactly when, but I know that's a nice tailwind. I know employment is still below pre-pandemic trend. The Fed is crazy to try to get rid of employment. We're still below pre-pandemic trend. We're above pre-pandemic employment, but come on, 3 years have gone by. We have more people. People have locked in about 2/3 of the people. This is real fast math. 2/3 of the people own their homes, and 2/3 of homeowners have mortgages. And that 2/3 largely locked in 2% or less mortgages when interest rates were really low. That means that their mortgage bears an interest rate, something like 2 to 3 percentage points lower than historic norm. That amounts to about, if you do math, that amounts to about 5% of their income for 42% of the population. I got to feel good about that, right? That 42% of the population has about 5% of their income pre-tax. This is after tax, right? Available to do stuff. We still haven't had a full recovery of travel and tourism. Travel and tourism is roughly almost back to pre-pandemic levels. But we've grown for 3 years. It should be like 5, 6, 7% higher. We have underconsumed automobiles. And so, for example, so you can identify these areas where we still have a lot of capacity, a lot. Businesses, how many? Yes, only 25. You read about how much debt is rolling over, but only like 25% of all corporate and real estate debt rolls over in the next 3 years. Most debt, 75%, was locked in by businesses at really low interest rates. That gives them cushion and margin. Now, so are there a lot of good things? Supply chains have finally started to normalize and so forth. There's a lot of good things. Are there a lot of bad things? Yes. What's the worst thing facing the economy? The worst thing facing the economy is a Fed who believes their job is to create a recession. That's a dangerous thing. 50 years ago, 50 years ago, I walked in, it was actually in November 50, it would be 50 years. I walked into my first class with Milton Friedman, and he said the Fed is always arrogant. They always believe they have tremendous control over the economy when they don't have much, and it's very poor control. They always are late, and they always overreact. By the way, some things never change. Right? They believe, the Fed believes that they're driving a high precision automobile on a perfect test track in perfect weather conditions. What they're really doing is steering a jalopy with bald tires on ice in a blizzard. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have some influence and they have some control, but they have way overreacted. They are reacting to something that is largely gone, namely inflation, that was not largely created by them. It was created by the supply chain issues, which had to do with supply shut down. Demand, thank God, came back. Supply lagged, thank God, because if supply had come back faster than demand, we'd have massive deflation, which would even have been a bigger problem. And so, but they can't help themselves. So we have a war going on between the economy and the Fed. And I'll highlight that in the following statement. Last month, the job numbers come out, I think, tomorrow and Friday for last month, but 2 months ago. So the most recent job numbers were something like we added 230,000 jobs in the month. Okay. And everybody in America was happy except the Fed,
right?
The members of the Fed. This small group of insular people were unhappy. Now, imagine if we'd have lost 500,000 jobs that month. Everybody in the country would have been unhappy except for the people at the Fed. That's a crazy approach to the economy. That's a crazy approach to the economy. And I know I'm simplifying, but it captures certain truth. So I think we've got more good going for us today with this big backdrop I said. But we certainly have things going for us, going against us. I mean, the fact that kids can't add, that kids don't know who Stalin was, we have all sorts of things going against us. In the immediate, the biggest thing going against us is the Fed. But come on, if we weathered shutting down the economy for a year and a half, we can weather the Fed.
This is part one of a two-part episode in the interview with Peter Linneman. There's a lot of great content. We couldn't fit it all into one episode, so be sure to tune in next week for part two.